He married his own mother, but what happened on the altar was something no one could have predicted. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching this video from. The summer air felt thick and heavy in the small southern mining town, where red clay roads cracked under the sun and the distant hum of the mine's machinery never ceased. Dust settled on the porches of old wooden houses, and the scent of magnolia blossoms blended with coal smoke drifting from the rail yards. In this town, everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew their place, or so they believed. Emily's world had always been this town, a close-knit black community living in weathered homes at the edge of the railroad tracks. She grew up watching her mother tend to neighbors' wounds with gentle hands and whispered prayers. From her, Emily inherited both compassion and strength. Now, as a young woman, she worked as a nurse at the local clinic, caring for the miners and their families. Her warm smile and capable hands had earned her the community's love, but she knew the invisible lines that divided the town. The white families lived up on the hill, their homes larger, their yards greener. Black families, like hers, lived on the outskirts, closer to the mines, closer to the danger. Emily accepted this with quiet dignity. She didn't have time for bitterness. Her life was about helping others. She believed her path was clear and her future simple, until she met Thomas. The meeting wasn't the stuff of fairy tales. It happened on a sweltering afternoon at the town's summer festival. Children raced through the dusty field chasing hoops, while gospel music poured from the church choir's open windows. Emily had taken a rare break from the clinic to enjoy the fair, but her habit of caregiving never rested. She noticed an older woman struggling to breathe under the weight of the heat, her face flushed and her steps unsteady. Without hesitation, Emily rushed to her side. "Ma'am, you need to sit down," she urged, guiding her to the shade of an oak tree. A voice interrupted, calm and steady. "Is she all right? Should I fetch some water?" Emily turned and found herself looking into the face of a man she didn't recognize. His shirt was damp from the heat, and his hands, though rough from labor, held a kindness that matched his concerned eyes. "She's overheated," Emily replied briskly. "Water, yes, and quickly." The man dashed off and returned moments later, handing Emily a cool glass from a nearby vendor. Together, they helped the woman sip until her breathing slowed. Only then did Emily glance back at her impromptu assistant. "Thank you," she said, wiping her brow. He smiled, wiping his own. "You're the one who did the real work." He extended his hand. Thomas Reed." "Emily," she replied simply, her hand meeting his briefly before she turned back to her patient. It was an ordinary meeting, but something lingered between them. Thomas didn't press for conversation, but his eyes followed her as she comforted the woman. When the older woman recovered and thanked them both, Thomas stepped back, as though knowing his part was done. Yet, as Emily turned to leave, he spoke again. "You're good at what you do," he said softly. "You care. That's rare." Emily paused, caught off guard by his sincerity. "It's just what I know," she replied. "That's what makes it special." In another world, perhaps their paths would have ended there. But in a town this small, paths crossed and recrossed. Thomas worked at the mine as an engineer, his hands calloused from the same labor that had broken so many men's bodies. Yet he carried himself differently, with a kind of thoughtful quietness that contrasted the gruffness of many miners. He began to appear more often, at the clinic under the pretense of delivering safety reports or checking on injured workers. Emily would catch his glance, feel the warmth in his half-smile. He was persistent, but not pushy, and slowly, like water smoothing stone, he wore down her guard. It wasn't easy. The town's eyes were on them. Emily felt the heat of stares when she walked down Main Street, the whispers from behind curtained windows. The disapproval wasn't always spoken aloud, but it was there, in the silence that greeted them at the diner, in the narrowing eyes of women from the church. Yet Thomas stood by her side, unshaken. "I don't care what they think," he told her one evening beneath the old oak tree where they'd first met. "You're the woman I choose." "But they'll never let us be," Emily replied, her voice heavy with the knowledge of how the world worked. Thomas took her hands, rough palms against her soft ones. "Then we'll show them, and we'll live our lives the way we want to." And so they did. Their wedding was small, held not in the grand church where Emily's family was unwelcome, but in the backyard of her childhood home, where the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the sky wide with promise. Only family and a handful of friends came, but it was enough. On their wedding night, as they sat together on the porch, Thomas made her a promise. "This house is our start," he said, his arm around her shoulders. "But one day I'll build you a big house with a garden, I promise." Emily, leaning against him, smiled softly. "As long as you're there, that's all I need." Their life together was simple, but filled with love. When their son, Mark, was born, Thomas's joy was boundless. He lifted the newborn high in the air and declared, "This boy is going to grow strong. He'll have every chance we never did." Mark grew up in a household where love was abundant, but so was discipline. Emily taught him kindness and patience. Thomas taught him honesty and hard work. But as the boy grew, he also began to see the cracks in the world around him. He saw how some people looked at his parents, a black mother and a white father, with eyes that judged or questioned. Yet, within their home, there was peace. Emily taught Mark to take pride in his roots, both from her side and his father's. Thomas, in turn, taught him how to stand firm in the face of prejudice. As the years passed, Thomas continued working at the mine, but his dreams stretched further. He wanted more than survival for his family. He wanted security, a legacy. He saved every extra dollar, planning to one day buy land and give Emily the home he had promised. But promises, like seeds, take time to bloom. And sometimes storms arrive before the harvest. The winds of fate were already stirring, and though none of them could yet see the shadows on the horizon, their roots, planted deep in love, were about to be tested. The air tasted of earth and metal when Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow, his shirt clinging to his back from the heat. The sun beat down relentlessly, casting golden rays across the rugged patch of land he had purchased just beyond the old rail tracks. The soil here was rich, but the earth beneath it was stubborn, hard-packed clay and scattered stones. Still, Thomas worked with the same determination that had guided him through every challenge life had thrown his way. The land wasn't much to look at, an acre of dry, uneven ground with a few scraggly pines clinging to the edges. But Thomas saw more than barren earth. He saw promise. It was here, he told Emily, that they would plant their future. Orchards, maybe, or a small vineyard, something that belonged to them and no one else. Emily had smiled at his vision but reminded him, "We already have everything we need. This is just the icing on the cake." But Thomas felt the weight of a man's responsibility. Love filled the heart, but security filled the belly. The mine paid their bills, but he knew how quickly a mine could take more than it gave. He had seen it happen, too many times. Broken bodies, shattered lungs, lives cut short under the earth. He didn't want the mine to be their only thread of survival. This land would be their safety net. Then fate, with its strange hand, showed him something else entirely. It happened on a cloudless afternoon. The rhythmic chug of his shovel cutting into the earth was the only sound. He had been working the land for days, clearing rocks and roots. He struck something solid, too hard for clay. He bent down, brushing the soil away, expecting a buried rock, but the stone that emerged wasn't ordinary. It glinted in the sunlight with a muted, warm sheen. Too bright, too yellow. His heart quickened. Could it be? Scooping up the stone, he turned it over in his hand, feeling its rough, unpolished texture. It was small, but unmistakable. Gold. Thomas's breath caught. He knelt, fingers trembling, and dug deeper into the soil. More small nuggets appeared, like the earth was offering him a secret it had kept hidden for centuries. He sat back on his heels, his chest heaving, his mind racing. Gold. Real gold. But as quickly as excitement surged through him, so did caution. He had worked in mines long enough to know what gold could do to people. Gold sparked greed. Gold brought trouble. Gold had toppled towns like this one into chaos. That night, he showed the nugget to Emily. Her eyes widened as she turned the stone in her hand, the lamplight making it shimmer. "Is it?" He nodded. "It's gold on our land." Emily's face, at first filled with wonder, quickly shifted to something more serious. "What does this mean, Thomas?" "It means we have a choice," he said, his voice steady but heavy with thought. "This could change everything, but it could also change us." Emily placed the nugget down on the kitchen table and covered his hand with hers. "What do you want to do?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "I want us to keep it quiet. If people find out, they'll come for it. I've seen what gold rushes do. Greed eats folks alive. This land could be our future, but only if we're smart. I say, we hold this close. We tell no one, not even Mark, not yet." Emily's fingers curled around his. "Then we bury it in our hearts, and we decide its purpose together. But promise me, Thomas, promise me the gold will never come before our family." His eyes met hers, and he squeezed her hand. "I swear, it never will." So the secret was sealed. They agreed the gold would be their insurance, nothing more. When the time was right, they would use it for their son's future. But until then, they would live their lives as though it didn't exist. The nugget was hidden away, and Thomas continued working the land as if nothing had changed. But it had. They both felt it. A golden thread now wove through their days, invisible but taut. Mark grew under their love, unaware of the secret his parents kept. His father taught him to split wood, mend fences, and treat every man, regardless of his color or coin, with the same respect. His mother taught him the power of kindness, the strength of patience, and the value of integrity. Yet, Mark was observant, and he wasn't blind to the hushed moments or the quick glances exchanged between his parents when they thought he wasn't looking. He overheard fragments of conversation, whispers about something hidden, something valuable. One summer evening, as the sky burned orange with the setting sun, Mark heard his father say something that would root itself deep in his young mind. "It's our family's safety, Em, our future, but not yet, not until the time is right." The word future wrapped itself around Mark's curiosity like a vine. He didn't know what it meant, but he felt it was something important, something his parents didn't want him to know. Years passed, and Thomas's land remained untouched by the gold beneath it. He kept his promise to Emily. Family first, always. They lived simply, comfortably, but without indulgence. But the mine, as Thomas had feared, proved merciless. Accidents became more frequent, the air underground thick with dust that gnawed at his lungs. He grew quieter, his coughs more frequent, his body slower. But he pressed on, because men like him always did. Mark was in his late teens when the first crack between him and his father appeared. "You're killing yourself in that mine," Mark said one evening, watching his father rub his aching back by the fire. "You don't have to. I know you and Ma. You're hiding something. We could be living better. Why are you still breaking your back when we don't need to?" Thomas's eyes, usually warm, turned cold with warning. "Mind your tongue, boy. You don't know what you're asking." "But I do." Mark's voice rose, frustration burning in his chest. "I hear you and Ma whispering about a future, about something valuable. Why keep it from me?" Thomas stood, towering, his voice low but firm. "Because some things are more important than money. Because you're not ready to understand." Mark's hands clenched into fists. "So when? When I'm old and broken too?" The tension snapped like a whip. Thomas's voice cut through the room. "You'll understand when you learn that a man's worth isn't counted in gold, but in his word." Mark felt the sting of dismissal and something deeper, betrayal. Why wouldn't his father trust him? What was so precious that even his own son couldn't know? The air between them grew colder after that. Mark stopped asking, and Thomas stopped explaining. But silence is not the absence of thought. It is where resentment grows unseen. Emily, caught between them, felt the shift, and it pained her. She wanted to tell Mark the truth, but Thomas was right. Too soon, and greed could spoil everything. She saw it in her son's eyes already, the hunger for what he didn't understand. But life, as always, gives no time for resolution. Fate, with its cruel clock, was winding tighter. The secret, once buried safely beneath earth and promise, had already begun to fracture their family from within, and the cracks would only grow wider. The rain came down in sheets, turning the dirt roads into rivers of mud. The sky, heavy with gray, seemed to press against the earth as if mourning alongside her. Emily stood on the porch, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, the downpour blurring the horizon. Her heart pounded with an ache so deep it threatened to tear her apart. Thomas was gone. The sheriff had arrived hours ago, his face grim beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His voice, thick with regret, had spoken the words that shattered her world. There was an accident. His truck lost control on the curve near the old bridge. He didn't make it. Emily had felt the earth fall away beneath her feet. She had not screamed. She had not cried. Not then. She had simply stood, cold and hollow as the world collapsed around her. Now the rain wept for her. The funeral was a quiet, somber affair. Few from the white side of town came, just the foreman from the mine and a handful of Thomas's colleagues, their faces etched with the knowledge that it could have been any one of them. The black community came in force, their voices lifting in a mournful hymn that carried Thomas's spirit skyward. Mark stood stiffly beside her, his face stone, his eyes dry. He hadn't spoken since the news. At the grave, as the first clods of earth thudded against the casket, Emily's knees buckled. She would have fallen had Mark not caught her. "I've got you, Mama," he whispered, his voice tight, his arms strong. Emily clung to him, her tears finally breaking free. But in her son's voice, and his body pressed to hers, she felt something sharp. Anger, hot and simmering beneath his skin. The house, once filled with Thomas's warmth, now felt hollow. Emily moved through it like a ghost, her hands lingering on the back of his chair, her eyes pausing on his worn work boots by the door. She half expected to hear his voice call from the yard, but only silence answered. Mark, too, wandered the halls like a caged animal. His grief was restless, and it turned inward, curling into something dark. The air between mother and son grew tense. Their conversations became short, their silences long. The house felt too small for the storm brewing inside them. The first real fight came 3 weeks after the funeral. Emily was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, when she heard the back door slam. Mark's boots clomped heavily across the floor. His face was flushed, his chest heaving. "Mama," he said, his voice taut as a wire, "I need to know." She didn't turn. "Know what, baby?" "You know what," he snapped. "The gold, the land. What are you hiding from me?" Emily's hand froze mid-wipe. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. "Mark—" "Don't mark me," he interrupted, his voice rising. "I heard you and Daddy whispering all these years. I know there's something. And now he's gone, and you're still keeping it from me. Why?" Emily felt her heart squeeze. "Because it's not about the gold," she said firmly. "It never was. Your father didn't want you chasing something that could ruin you." Mark's eyes flashed. "Then why keep it secret? If it wasn't important, why hide it from your own son?" She stepped forward, her voice soft but steel-edged. "Because we wanted you to grow up knowing that what makes a man isn't what he has in his pocket, but what he has in his heart." Mark's hands balled into fists. "That's easy to say when you're holding the keys to something that could change our lives. Don't you get it, Mama? We don't have to live like this. We could be free of all this struggle." Emily's voice cracked like a whip. "We were free." She stepped closer, her fingers stabbing the air between them. "We had everything that mattered. Love, family, honesty. That was your father's legacy." Mark's face twisted, his voice cold with accusation. "And now he's dead, and all you have is an empty house and a bunch of pretty words." The silence that followed was thick and choking. Emily's face hardened, her grief burning into something unbreakable. "Your father trusted me with that secret, and I will keep it until the day I die if I have to. You think gold is power? Real power is knowing when not to use it." Mark's jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with frustration. Without another word, he turned and stormed out the door. The screen slammed shut behind him, rattling the windows. Mark didn't come home that night. He spent it at the old oak tree where his father had proposed to his mother. The stars above him were cold and distant, and the earth beneath him felt hard and unforgiving. His father had always been a mystery, so full of love, yet so guarded. Now he had taken his secrets to the grave, and Mark felt locked out, an outsider in his own family's story. He stared into the darkness, his teeth clenched. He wasn't a child anymore. If his mother wouldn't tell him, he would find out on his own. The distance between Mark and Emily only grew in the days that followed. She felt his absence even when he was in the house, the way he avoided her eyes, the way his answers came short and cold. And though it broke her heart, she held firm. But grief is a cruel companion, and it burrows deep. Emily's nights became sleepless. She'd wake to the ghost of Thomas's voice, or worse, the crushing silence where he should have been. She began to lose her appetite, her frame growing thinner. The dreams came next. Thomas standing on their land, his face half in shadow. "Watch over him," he would say, his voice distant and strange. "He's on the wrong path." She would wake, drenched in sweat, the weight of his warning pressing down on her chest. Mark, meanwhile, began searching. Quietly at first, poking around the edges of the land, turning over stones, probing the earth with a shovel. He knew his father had bought the land for a reason, and he was certain the gold was there. When he wasn't digging, he was reading. Books about prospecting, maps of the area, anything that might give him a clue. His hands grew blistered from the work, his nails cracked with dirt, but he found nothing. The land seemed determined to keep its secret. The tension finally snapped one stormy night. Emily, hearing the crash of thunder, rose from bed and saw a flicker through the window, light on the edge of the property. Grabbing a coat, she stepped into the night, the rain immediately soaking her through. In the field, she found Mark, his clothes drenched, his face streaked with mud, digging furiously by lantern light. The earth around him was a mess of trenches and broken roots. "Mark!" she shouted over the wind. "What are you doing?" He didn't stop. His shovel bit into the earth again and again. "I know it's here," he yelled, his voice raw. "I know you're hiding it from me." Emily, her face pale with shock and fury, stepped into the pit. Rain ran down her face, but her eyes burned. "Stop this!" she screamed, her voice cracking with something deeper than anger, heartbreak. Mark spun to face her, his chest heaving, his face twisted in desperation. "Why won't you just tell me?" Her voice came low, trembling with grief and steel. "Because your father wanted better for you than this." She gestured to the mud, the ruin, the madness in his eyes. "He wanted you to be more than a man chasing gold." The shovel slipped from his hands, clattering against the stones. His knees hit the mud, and the fight drained out of him all at once. His voice broke into a whisper. "He's gone, Mama, and I don't know how to fix the hole he left." Emily's anger melted into sorrow. She sank to her knees beside him, her hands cupping his face. "Baby," she whispered, "you're not supposed to feel it. You're supposed to carry it. It's the weight of love." Mark's shoulders shook, and at last he let the tears come. But even as they knelt together in the storm, something unseen passed between them. A fracture, thin as a hairline crack but deep as a fault line. Because though Mark wept in his mother's arms, his heart still burned with questions. And though Emily held her son close, her heart clenched with fear. The secret, buried not in the earth but in their hearts, was no longer safe. The cracks had formed, and cracks, given time, only widen. The air in the house grew still and cold, as if grief itself had taken up permanent residence. The warmth that Thomas had carried, the anchor that kept them steady, was gone. In its place was silence, thick, heavy, and full of unspoken things. Time didn't heal. It only settled, like dust over a forgotten room. Emily felt the weight of it in her bones. She moved through her days with a weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. Her hands, once so sure and steady, trembled when she tried to thread a needle or pour tea. She would stand in a room and forget why she had entered it. The first time it happened, she laughed it off. "Must be my age," she joked to herself. But the moments of confusion became more frequent. She would misplace things, her glasses, her keys, the letters from the bank, and spend hours searching, only to find them somewhere strange, like the pantry or the linen drawer. She told herself it was the stress. She was mourning her husband. Of course, her mind felt foggy. That was normal, but the dreams worried her. They came often now, vivid, like memories she hadn't lived. She would see Thomas standing on their land, his back turned to her, his voice distant and soft. "Watch him," he would say. "Our boy's walking a path too dark for him." She would reach out to touch his shoulder, but he would vanish, and she would wake, her chest tight and her pillow damp with tears. And then there were the days days that slipped through her fingers entirely. She would blink, and the sun would be setting, and she would have no memory of the hours between. Mark noticed. At first, it was little things, his mother calling him Thomas by mistake, repeating a question she had asked minutes earlier. He brushed it off. She was grieving. That's all it was. But then he found her one morning standing barefoot in the front yard, still in her nightgown, her eyes blank and far away. She didn't know how she had gotten there. "Mama," he said softly, wrapping his coat around her shoulders, "you're scaring me." She blinked up at him, and for a flicker of a second, he saw fear in her eyes. I don't know what's happening to me, baby," she whispered. Mark felt his stomach twist. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "I'll take care of you." But deep inside him, a darker thought stirred. If she forgets everything, will she forget about the gold? The distance between them, the tension that had defined the months after Thomas's death, softened under the weight of her illness. Mark became her caretaker, driving her to appointments, helping her with bills, ensuring she ate when her appetite faded. In the evenings, they would sit together in the living room, Emily knitting with slow, careful fingers, Mark pretending to read but watching her more than the page. But the questions gnawed at him, and the dreams, his dreams, began to mirror hers. He would see the land, but it was scorched and broken, pockmarked with craters and lined with jagged trenches where his own hands had dug. His father would be there, standing in the ruins, his voice cold with disappointment. "This isn't what I wanted, son." Mark would wake, his chest heaving, his fists clenched around nothing but air. One evening, as they sat together, Emily's voice, soft and wandering, broke the silence. "You know, he promised me a wedding." Mark glanced at her, puzzled. "Mama, you and Daddy were married." She smiled, but her eyes were somewhere else. "I know that, silly boy. But he said when we got old, we'd do it again, with flowers and music. He wanted to see me in white, said I'd be the most beautiful bride all over again." Her fingers paused on her knitting. "He said he'd show me something special that day, something just for me." Mark's body went still. His heart began to pound. What was it, Mama?" he asked, his voice careful, light. Emily's smile softened into something sad. "I don't know. He never told me. Just said it was something precious, and I'd see it when we stood together at the altar." Mark's hands tightened on his knees. He felt the familiar coil of frustration, of hunger for the truth that had been dangled in front of him for so long. But his mother's face, serene in her haze of memory, gave him pause. He swallowed the questions clawing at his throat. But restraint is a fleeting thing when desire is starved for too long. The dreams continued, and the hints, so close, always out of reach, drove him restless. His mother's mind was unraveling, and with it the last threads of the secret. He began searching the house, first casually, then obsessively. Drawers, closets, the attic, anywhere his father could have left a clue. In the old trunk by the bed, he found his father's journal. He flipped through its pages, his breath quick and shallow. But it held only notes about the mine, sketches of the land, calculations, nothing about the gold. His patience thinned to nothing. And then, one night, he overheard her speaking. From the hallway, he saw the glow of her bedside lamp and heard her soft, distant voice. "You're so handsome, Tommy," she said to the empty air. "I can't wait to see the dress you picked. I know you said you'd show me the secret when we're together at the altar." Mark's heart stopped. The altar. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't some poetic promise. His father meant it. The secret was tied to the wedding his mother believed was still ahead of her. The realization struck him hard and fast. She would never remember it now. Her mind was drifting further from the shore with every passing day. But what if he could bring her to that moment? What if he could make her believe it was real? If she truly thought she was marrying his father again, wouldn't she share the secret at the altar, just as she believed he had promised? The thought was madness, a cruel trick, but it felt like destiny. The gold wasn't his obsession anymore. It was his right. It was the thing his father had hidden from him, and now it was within reach. But he needed her to give it to him, freely, without suspicion. So the plan took root, slowly, carefully. The first step was setting the stage. He began to play into her illusions, answering her when she spoke to his father as though he were there. When she asked, "What flowers should we have for the wedding, Tommy?" Mark would say softly, "White roses, Mama, your favorite." When she hummed old songs from their wedding day, he joined her, filling in the forgotten verses. The days blended into something strange and bittersweet. Emily, lost in her past, grew brighter, happier. She spoke more of Thomas, of the promise, of the day to come. But inside Mark, the storm only grew. He approached the pastor of their old church, his voice heavy with false tenderness. "My mama," he said, his voice catching, "she's losing her memories. But she keeps talking about how Daddy promised her another wedding. I thought, maybe if we gave her that, it would bring her peace." The pastor's face softened with pity. "What a loving thing to do for her, son. Of course we can." The dress came next. Not new, an old one from the attic, but pressed and white, clean and soft. He showed it to Emily one evening, his voice gentle. "Mama, Daddy wanted you to have this for your wedding day." Her hands trembled as they touched the fabric. "Oh, Tommy," she whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "You remembered." Mark swallowed against the knot in his throat. "Of course he did," he lied. The final piece, the altar, the church, the place where his father had married her the first time. It would be there, he felt certain, that the truth would finally come. As the day approached, Emily's excitement was childlike, pure. She spoke often of how proud Thomas would be to see them together. She didn't know what she was walking into. Mark told himself it wasn't cruelty, it was destiny. The night before, he sat alone in his room, the weight of his deception pressing against his chest. His father's voice haunted him in the darkness. "This isn't what I wanted, son." Mark clenched his fists. "You didn't want me to have it," he whispered to the shadows, "but I deserve it." His voice cracked, bitterness and grief bleeding together. "I'm doing this for us, for her, for the family. You left us with nothing but questions." The silence gave no answer. In the other room, Emily lay dreaming, and in her dreams, Thomas smiled at her sadly. The sun rose on the day of the false wedding. The bells would ring, the vows would be spoken, and Mark would have his truth. But the truth would cost more than he could ever imagine. The morning sun bled soft amber through the thin curtains as Emily stirred in her bed, her frail hands resting on the white linen sheet. The house, silent except for the whisper of the wind through the trees, felt as though it was holding its breath. In the room next door, Mark sat on the edge of his bed, his fingers laced tightly, his knuckles pale from pressure. His heart pounded steadily, each beat counting down to the moment he had spent weeks constructing. Today, the plan would unfold. He had rehearsed every detail in his mind. The church, the dress, the vows, everything crafted to bring his mother into the fragile illusion she had built within her mind. She lived more in her memories now than in the present, and he would use those memories to guide her where he needed her most. The altar. That was where his father had promised to reveal the secret. And now she would deliver it instead. The lie sat cold and heavy inside him, but he justified it with a whisper that had grown familiar. This was not cruelty. It was closure. She longed for one last moment with his father. He longed for the truth. This was the only way. A soft knock on her door, and his voice, steady, warm, a mask for the cracks within. "Mama, you awake?" Her voice came small but bright. "Come in, sweetheart." When he entered, he found her sitting up, her hair brushed, her eyes soft with a dreamer's glow. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice gentle. She smiled, a distant, secret smile. "I dreamed of him. He was waiting for me under the oak tree. He said today was the day." Her voice held a fragile certainty. "Is it, baby? Is it today?" Mark's throat tightened. He knelt by her side and took her hand, pressing it between his own. "Yes, Mama. Today's the day." Her eyes, clouded by time, shimmered with sudden tears. "I knew he wouldn't forget. I knew." Mark felt his heart splinter, but he did not let it show. He helped her from the bed, guiding her toward the small dressing table where the white gown lay folded, clean and pressed. She gasped softly at the sight of it. "Oh, it's beautiful." Her fingers, trembling, touched the fabric with reverence. Did he choose this for me?" Mark's voice barely held. "Yes, Mama, he did. Just for you." Her eyes met his, and something flickered there, pure, unguarded trust. "Help me, sweetheart. I want to look perfect for him." The weight of her belief crushed him, but his hands were steady as he helped her dress, smoothing the soft fabric over her thin shoulders, fastening each delicate button with care. When she was ready, he stepped back, and for a fleeting, heartbreaking moment, he saw her as she must have been on her first wedding day, radiant, alive, and lost in love. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Will you walk me down the aisle?" The question struck him harder than any accusation could. He felt his throat close, but he managed a nod. "Of course, Mama. I'll be right there with you." The drive to the church was hushed, the world outside their windows painted in soft strokes of gold and green. Emily hummed to herself, a gentle melody from long ago, and Mark's hands gripped the wheel, his palms slick against the leather. The steeple of the old church rose into view, whitewashed and timeless, the very place where his parents had stood together decades before. The pastor waited on the steps, his eyes kind, his face touched with a sadness he did not voice. Inside, the sanctuary smelled of aged wood and lilies. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass, casting colored patterns across the pews. The small gathering, neighbors, old friends, stood quietly as Emily entered, her arm hooked through Mark's. Whispers of admiration floated like petals in the air. "She looks beautiful," someone murmured. "What a gift her son has given her." But Mark did not hear them. His heart beat loud and hard, every step toward the altar pulling a cord tighter around his chest. Emily's hand, soft in his, trembled slightly, but her face was lit with joy. Her eyes fixed ahead, seeing not the old pastor, not the empty space, but her husband, waiting. The pastor welcomed them with gentle words, his voice warm, his expression full of reverence for the moment he believed he was helping create. "We gather here today," he began, "to witness a vow that time could never erase. A love that endures beyond the boundaries of this world." Emily's lips parted in a soft smile, She turned her face slightly, as if hearing a whisper only she could catch. "Oh, Tommy," she breathed, "you kept your promise." The pastor spoke the vows, his voice weaving through the quiet air. "Emily, do you take your beloved in heart and spirit to walk with you forever?" Her voice was clear and sure. "I do." Mark felt his pulse quicken, his throat dry, his palms clammy. This was it, the moment, the altar, the promise. He barely heard the pastor as he turned to him. "And Mark, as you stand witness to this vow of everlasting love, do you pledge your heart to carry their legacy?" Mark's voice, tight and cracking, escaped in a whisper. "I do." Then Emily, her eyes shining, turned to him, her son, her heart. She reached and touched his face, her fingers brushing his cheek as though brushing away time itself. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice filled with a gentle knowing that chilled his blood. "You never had to do this for me." His breath hitched. "Mama," but she continued, her gaze steady and impossibly clear. "You wanted his secret. I know. I've always known." The world stopped. The church, the pastor, the guests, they faded into the edges of his vision. Only her voice remained, threading into his chest, pulling his ribs apart. "You thought he'd tell me at the altar, but baby, you don't understand." Her hand, still cradling his face, trembled with something tender and unbearably sad. "The secret wasn't the gold. It was you." His heart thundered, confusion crashing over him in waves. "Mama, I don't—" Her eyes, so soft, so full of love, pierced him through. "He didn't hide the gold to keep it from you. He kept it to protect you from what it could make you. The only treasure he ever wanted you to have was the man he knew you could be." Mark's chest collapsed, the air fleeing his lungs in a ragged, broken gasp. The church, the altar, the lies, everything shattered beneath the weight of her words. And within him, something cracked open, something raw, something that had festered for years in the shadows of his longing. His knees buckled, and he sank, his hands clutching hers as if he could hold the truth within her palms. His voice, torn from him, broke into a sob. "Mama, Mama, I—" But the light in her eyes flickered. Her smile, soft and peaceful, remained, but her gaze drifted, and he felt her hands weaken in his. The room seemed to tilt, the air thinnen. A whisper, barely a breath, escaped her lips. "Tommy, I see you." And her body, frail and light, slipped from his grasp. A gasp rippled through the church as Mark caught her, his arms cradling her as her knees folded. Her head rested against his chest, and his voice, frantic and shaken, called her name. "Mama, Mama, stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered, her lips parting once more, but her voice was a whisper from another world. "He's here. I see him." And then, softly, gently, she was gone. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the sound of Mark's shattered sobs, his body curled around hers, holding her as though he could keep her from slipping into the place where his voice could never reach. No gold, no secret, no fortune could fill the chasm that opened in his chest. He had lied. He had schemed. He had broken her heart to reach a treasure that had never existed. But he had found it, and it had cost him everything. The church held its breath. The colors from the stained glass windows seemed muted, the soft light barely touching the pews where the handful of witnesses sat frozen in disbelief. The pastor, his voice lost in the terrible stillness, stood with his hands half raised, unsure whether to step forward or retreat into the shadows. And at the center of it all, cradled in Mark's arms, lay Emily, her face soft, peaceful, as if she had simply drifted into sleep. But her chest no longer rose. Her fingers, which moments before had brushed his cheek with the warmth of a mother's love, lay still and cold. The sound that broke the silence was not the pastor's prayer or the shuffle of guests, but Mark's voice, raw and cracked beyond recognition. It escaped him, not as a word, but as something primal and wounded, a sound born from the deepest hollow of his chest. Mama. His head bowed low, forehead pressed against her cooling brow, and in that moment the weight of his deception crashed over him with a force that buckled his body. She was gone, and she had taken with her every answer he had clawed through his soul to reach. Someone touched his shoulder, a hesitant, gentle pressure, but he recoiled from it as if burned. His voice, hoarse and trembling, barely carried beyond his lips. "No, not now. Please." His arms pulled her closer, rocking her lifeless form as though the motion could summon her spirit back, as though he could press life into her with the force of his agony. The pastor, with a face folded in grief and pity, at last found his voice. "Son, she's with the Lord now. Let us—" Mark's head snapped up, his eyes wild, glassy, and furious. "No!" The word cracked through the air, sharp and jagged, silence in the room once more. His chest heaved, his throat raw from the scream that barely contained the storm within. "You don't understand. His voice faltered and he broke, his words spilling, fragmented and broken from his lips. "I did this. This wasn't a wedding. It was a lie. His voice choked, his body curling protectively over Emily as though shielding her from his own confession. "I tricked her. I thought, if she believed—" His voice crumbled into gasps, strangled and wet with tears. The faces around him blurred, but he could feel their shock, their horror. The whispers began, soft and sharp as needles against his skin. What's he saying? He lied to her? My God. The pastor, his voice now stern but sorrowful, stepped forward. "Mark," he said, low and steady, "son, listen to me. You're grieving. This is not—" But Mark surged to his feet, his body trembling, his face streaked with tears and the dirt of the earth from where he had knelt. His voice, when it came, was stripped raw, torn from the very center of him. "I wanted her to tell me. He stumbled back a step, his mother's body cradled in his arms. I thought she'd tell me where it was. The gold. His voice broke fully then, the last of his defenses shattering. "I didn't want this," he gasped, and the final word was a cry, fractured and helpless. A woman near the front clasped her hands to her mouth. "Dear Lord." The pastor's voice was grave now, a thread of grief and reprimand entwined. "You used your mother's love to chase a fortune?" His eyes, heavy with sorrow, pierced through Mark's shattered soul. "Son, what have you done?" The question, spoken aloud, was a spear through his chest. Mark staggered beneath it, his knees weakening, but he could not fall. He could not let her go. His gaze dropped to Emily's face, so peaceful, so far from the storm that raged within him. "Mama," he whispered, his voice crumbling into dust, "I'm sorry. I thought I had time to make it right. I thought—" But the earth gave no answer, and neither did she. He felt the presence of hands, gentle, prying, trying to ease him from her. The pastor's voice, soft but unyielding. "Let us take her, son. Let her rest." Mark's body locked, his arms tightening protectively around her, a feral, broken refusal forming on his lips. But something in the weight of her, the unnatural stillness of her, told him the battle was already lost. Slowly, as though the air had turned to glass around him, he loosened his grip, his hands trailing from her as if afraid to lose the last warmth of her touch. And then she was gone from him, lifted, borne away down the aisle where once he had walked her, and the air collapsed into a silence so sharp it felt like the absence of life itself. His knees met the wooden floor, and there, before the altar he had defiled with his lies, he broke. The sound that left him was not human, but something stripped of language, a sound from the marrow of grief. His fist struck the ground once, twice, until his knuckles split, until the wood beneath him was smeared with his blood, until he could no longer feel anything but the cavernous, hollow ache that devoured him from within. The church emptied slowly, the crowd fleeing the ruin they had witnessed, their whispers following him like shadows. His own mother. For gold. The poor woman. But Mark heard none of it. He heard only her voice, soft, gentle, eternal. You never had to do this for me. The pastor remained, a solemn sentinel in the wreckage of what should have been a sacred moment. At last his voice broke the silence, low and heavy with the finality of judgment. You've lost more than gold today, son. You've lost the only treasure that ever mattered. The words did not cut. They found only what was already hollow and collapsed within it. Mark's body, spent and broken, folded beneath the weight of his ruin. And the church, that ancient witness to vows and prayers, stood silent and unmoved, holding his sorrow within its old and unforgiving walls. Outside, the sky, as if mourning, began to weep. The earth felt cold beneath his knees. The scent of rain, wood, and lilies clung to the air, and the last echoes of the fall ceremony seemed to ring in the silence, hollow and mocking. Mark remained on the floor of the empty church, his body folded into himself, his fists bloody and raw from pounding against the hard planks. The tears that had ravaged him had run dry, leaving his face stiff with salt and his throat hollowed from the screams that had stripped him bare. Emily was gone, and he was alone in the ruin of his own making. The silence pressed against him, thick and suffocating, but within it he heard everything. The whispers of the crowd that had witnessed his disgrace, the pastor's heavy voice condemning him, and, above all, his mother's final words, "You never had to do this for me." Each syllable twisted inside him a blade that he had forged with his own hands. He had thought he was chasing gold. Instead, he had torn his family's heart from its chest and stood alone with the ashes. The heavy doors of the church creaked open behind him, and soft footsteps crossed the worn floorboards. The pastor's voice, low and steady, reached him from above. "Mark, it's time to go." But Mark's voice, when it came, was a rasp from the hollow well of his chest. "Where?" He lifted his face, streaked with grief and rage. "Where can I go now?" His eyes, bloodshot and burning, locked onto the pastor's, and within them flickered something wild, something desperate. "She's gone," he choked, "and there's nothing left." The pastor's gaze, heavy with sorrow and a trace of something harder, held his. "There's the truth," he said simply. "That's what's left, if you have the courage to face it." Mark's lips curled bitterly, his voice raw. "The truth?" His laugh was broken glass. "The truth is she's dead, and I—" His throat closed, but the words burned their way out. "I killed her. With my lies, with my greed. That's the only truth I've got." The pastor did not flinch, though his eyes shone with the reflection of Mark's ruin. "Then live with it. Or find a way to make something of it, but running won't bury it, and it won't bring her back." Mark's body trembled, his fingers clawing into the floor, but the fire within him had burned to embers. Slowly, painfully, he rose. His limbs felt like lead, his chest hollow and raw, but he stood. The pastor did not move, only watched, waiting. Mark's voice, when it returned, was scraped from the wreckage of him. "I have to know," he said, and the words tasted of iron and ash. "I have to know what he kept from me." The pastor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of disappointment cutting through the sorrow. "Even now?" His voice was soft but cold. "Even after everything, you're still chasing it?" Mark's hands curled into fists at his sides, and the raw edge of his voice scraped the air. "I chased it to the edge of everything. I lost her to it. If I don't know what it cost me, what it cost her, then it was all for nothing." The pastor studied him, the weight of judgment deep in his eyes, but he did not argue. "Then go," he said, the words heavy and final, "but understand, what you find may be heavier than what you've already lost." Mark's voice was a whisper, a thread pulled tight to the point of breaking. "It already is." The sky wept as he left the church, the rain soft and cold against his skin, washing the blood from his hands but not the stain from his soul. The town seemed to shrink away from him as he passed, the few remaining faces turning from him, their silence a verdict sharper than any words. He felt their scorn, their disgust, but none of it touched the hollow place inside him. Nothing could. The house stood waiting, dark and still, its windows blank eyes staring into the storm. He entered without turning on the lights, the shadows fitting him like a second skin. The air was thick with absence, the rooms ringing with the ghost of her, the chair where she had rocked in the afternoons, the kitchen where her humming had once threaded through the air. He passed these remnants as though walking through a tomb. His steps led him where instinct, where madness demanded, the land. His father's land. The place where the promise had been buried. Rain clung to his face and hair as he stumbled through the sodden earth, his hands raw and torn as he clawed through mud and stone, seeking what? He did not know. He only knew he could not stop. His body moved with a force beyond reason, beyond sanity. It was the movement of something broken and desperate, something hollowed by loss and driven by the ache of an answer that had destroyed everything it touched. And then his hand struck something. Not gold, not riches, wood. Old, cold, and waiting. He froze, his breath ragged and sharp in his chest, and with fingers trembling and slick with mud, he pried it free. It was a box, weathered and worn, sealed against the earth. His hands, shaking, broke it open. Inside, no gold, no fortune. Only a letter, the paper soft with age, folded carefully, sealed with a name he knew better than his own. Emily. The world narrowed, the storm forgotten. His fingers, trembling, broke the seal. The ink, faded but clear, spoke with his father's hand. "My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I have left you the weight of my love and the burden of a secret I swore to keep. I never wanted it to be yours alone. I wanted to tell you, but I feared what it might do to you, to us, to him. There is gold on this land, but it was never the treasure. The treasure was the choice. I chose you. I chose our family over fortune, and I chose to keep it from Mark because I saw in him a fire, a hunger too sharp for his young heart to hold. I knew the gold would feed it, and I feared it would consume him. I wanted him to grow without it, to find his wealth in love, in labor, in life. But if you are holding this, I fear my silence has cost you more than I ever dreamed. If he is searching, if he has reached for it, I beg you, do not let it take him. Let him know that what I kept from him was never his birthright. His birthright was you. His birthright was the man he could become, not the gold he could claim. If I have failed you both, forgive me. My greatest treasure has always been you. Yours forever, Thomas." The paper slipped from Mark's hands, and his body, emptied and shattered, folded into the earth. His father's voice, his mother's sacrifice, his own ruin, all of it crushed into him until he could bear no more. The sob that broke from him tore through the storm, and for the first time he felt it, the full weight of what he had done. His father's love, his mother's trust had been the treasure, and he had burned it all to ash. The gold had never been the curse. He was. The rain fell, cold and relentless, but it could not cleanse him. There was no penance here, no absolution, only the raw, open wound of a truth he could never escape. And, in the echo of his father's final words, he heard the only sentence that mattered. You have lost more than gold. You have lost yourself. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy, thick with the weight of the storm that had passed. The earth, torn and raw, seeped water like a wound. Mark lay motionless in the mud, his body spent, his hands caked with earth and blood, the letter from his father clutched to his chest. The silence around him was vast, broken only by his own ragged breathing. He felt hollowed, carved out from within, and in the void that remained, there was nothing but the echo of every choice he had made and every life it had cost. His father's words still burned in his chest, each line a blade that cut deeper than the last. The gold had never been his birthright. His mother had been. The family they had built, the love they had tried to pass to him, that had been the treasure. And he had destroyed it all, chasing shadows in the dirt. He had buried his mother not in a grave, but beneath the weight of his greed, and he had raised the only thing that had ever truly belonged to him, her trust. The sky began to pale with the first hint of dawn, a cold and fragile light seeping over the ruin of his world. He did not move for a long time. When he finally rose, it was not with any sense of purpose, only the instinctive broken motion of something that still lived because it had not yet died. His knees wobbled, his body screamed with the ache of exhaustion, but he moved. His steps, slow and uncertain, carried him back toward the house. The old wooden steps creaked beneath his weight as he crossed the threshold, the door swinging open with a soft groan. Inside, the house was silent, stripped of its soul. The scent of his mother's cooking no longer lingered in the air, and the rooms that had once been filled with her warmth now felt like the hollowed-out shell of a life he had burned to the ground. His eyes drifted to her chair by the window, empty and still, the Afghan folded neatly over the backrest as if waiting for her return. But she would never return. He had made certain of that. His knees buckled, and he sank to the floor, the old wood cold against his skin. He felt the sobs building again, but they caught in his throat, strangled and raw, and what escaped him instead was a sound that was neither grief nor rage, but something shattered between the two. He pressed his forehead to the ground, and for the first time in his life he prayed, not for gold, not for fortune, but for forgiveness. But there was no answer. Time blurred. The light of day crawled across the floorboards and faded into the dimness of evening. He remained where he had fallen, crushed beneath the weight of his ruin. When the knock came at the door, it was soft but sharp in the stillness. Mark flinched, his body stiff and slow as he turned his head toward the sound. He did not rise. He could not. The knock came again, firmer. "Mark?" The voice, familiar and low, carried a rough edge, like gravel turned underfoot. It was the pastor. Mark did not answer, but the door creaked open anyway. The pastor stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the room until they found Mark, crumpled and broken on the floor. The man's face, lined with the wear of years and the weight of too many funerals, softened with something that was not quite pity, not quite judgment, but something heavy and knowing. "You've been here all night," the pastor said quietly. Mark's voice, when it came, was a rasp from the depths of his chest. The word collapsed under its own weight. He tried again. "I'll read it." His fingers clenched tighter around the crumpled letter. I read what he wrote. The pastor watched him for a long moment. And Mark's throat tightened until it felt like he was choking on the answer. His voice, when it broke free, was a whisper stripped to its bones. "I was wrong." His head bowed, his forehead pressing again to the floor. "I was so wrong." The room held the words in its silence, letting them fall like stones into the abyss that lay between what was and what could never be again. The pastor's voice, steady but rough, followed them down. "Truth comes late sometimes, but it's here." Mark's voice cracked, torn and broken. "It's too late." His chest heaved, the words struggling out between gasps. "She's gone. She's gone. And she knew what I was. And I—" The sob finally broke, raw and helpless. "I can't undo it." The pastor stepped forward, his boots creaking softly against the floor, and sank to his knees beside the wreck of the man who had burned his own house to the ground. He did not reach for Mark, did not try to pull him from the ruins of himself. He only spoke. "No," he said, his voice low and firm. "You can't undo it." He let the words fall, heavy and unflinching. "You can't bring her back, and you can't change what you did." His eyes, when Mark finally lifted his own, were sharp and unyielding. "But you can decide what you do with it. You can decide whether you let this be your grave or whether you make something of it." Mark's body trembled, his eyes wide and hollowed with grief. "How?" he whispered, the question barely more than a breath. "How do I make anything from this?" The pastor's voice was steady, weighted with the kind of truth that comes only from loss. "By carrying it, by letting it break you, because it should break you, but not so you stay broken, so you know what it cost, so you never forget." Mark's chest heaved, and his voice, stripped and raw, barely held. "And if I can't?" The pastor's gaze did not waver. Then it was all for nothing. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of the choice that lay before him, sharp and cold. At last, with hands that shook and a heart that could barely beat beneath the weight it bore, Mark moved. He pressed the letter, creased and dirtied but sacred, against his chest, and his voice, barely more than a whisper, broke into the stillness. "I'm sorry." His eyes lifted to meet the pastor's, and the rawness within them stripped him bare. "I'm so sorry." The pastor did not answer with words. Instead, he reached forward and laid his hand, firm and steady, on Mark's shoulder. And in that touch, there was no absolution, only the weight of grief, shared and understood. The path would not be easy, there would be no simple redemption, but there was a path, and Mark, crushed and broken, chose to rise. The cost of gold had been everything, but the cost of forgiveness would be more, and he would pay it, every day, for the rest of his life. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful and thought-provoking tales. Share this video with your friends to keep the conversation going. And if you're curious for more, check out our other videos. You might find your next favorite story waiting for you.